Well, thank you very much, Shane, to you and to First Mine and Gold for your sponsorship, and thanks to all the sponsors. It's a real incredible honor for me to be here. I've been to Thunder Bay a number of times before, but I'm really delighted to be here for the first time. And so I want to thank Charla Robinson and her team, and Jason and the Anishinaabe Business Professional Association for the invitation. Now, I'm sure most, if not all of you, know Charla and Jason. And I have to say, when Charla invited me, I realized what I'd already known, but it really came clear to me why she's one of Northern Ontario's most strategic business leaders. Because we were sitting together at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce annual meeting in Halifax. And so Charla very strategically comes up to me and says, hey, we'd love you to come up to Thunder Bay and speak in 2025. Would you do that? I said, absolutely. Whenever you need me, I'll be there. And she says, great. You're on for Thunder Bay in January. So, I got to say, Latin Americans are not built for this kind of weather, right? But having said all that, I'm so proud to be here. I'm so excited to be here. And even more so as I think about the month that we have just had in Ontario. We've seen the resignation of Canada's Prime Minister. We've seen a US president begin his term in office, not attacking or targeting China or Russia or any other great rival of the United States of America in the world, but instead targeting Canada, America's closest friend, ally, and trading partner. And of course, right here in Thunder Bay and all over Ontario, starting today, we're in a provincial election campaign. So you may say, Dan, how the hell does any of this excite you, right? Maybe I'm a geek, right? Maybe I'm a nerd when it comes to these things. But you know what? It is true that all we seem to see right now is instability and risk and uncertainty. But here's the thing. If we look more closely, when we see uncertainty, there's also opportunity. And that is something that I find really exciting, because I want to talk about that opportunity today, and I specifically want to apply it to Northern Ontario and the work that we can do together. So let's start with the big problems Ontario needs to solve. And I'm not talking about the problems of today. I'm not talking about 2025 or even 2030, right? I'm talking about the next 20 years. I'm talking about our standard of living and the standard of living that we bequeath to the generations that follow. And here's the problem. It starts with demographics. Our population is aging, we have more people retiring, and at the same time, they're living longer. So those of us who are working, we've got more on our shoulders, right? Because the expenses of caring for these older folks who've worked hard all their lives, we have to take care of them, and those expenses go up, and there are fewer of us to pay the bills. So as a society, we only then have 4 options to pay for the standard of living that we expect and deserve. So what can we do? We can raise taxes, which obviously no government wants to do and no business wants to embrace, right? We can go deeper into debt, which no government can afford to do for very long, especially after the pandemic and the billions of dollars that are likely to have to pump into the economy if the Trump tariff threat materializes. Third, we can increase immigration. And historically, that's worked pretty well. But how's that going for us in the last few years, right? It's not the fault of the immigrants who come here with, open hearts and big dreams. But as a society, we haven't yet built the houses and healthcare institutions and all the other infrastructure that we need to ensure that those dreams can come true. So finally, final choice, the only other choice, is we can increase productivity. Well, how's that going for us, right? Productivity isn't rising, it's falling steadily in Ontario and in Canada. So it's not surprising that right now, for the first time probably in modern history, more than half of Canadians would agree with the statement that my standard of living is going down, not going up. And that really hurts. Families and small businesses, they struggle to make ends meet. It's particularly acute, based on research in rural and remote and Indigenous communities. And in communities of all types, everywhere I go, I've been in the last year to more than 35 different Ontario communities in this role. And everywhere I go, I walk around those main streets and I see what you see every single day. Problems of mental health, problems of addictions, problems of homelessness. And so governments struggle to deal with the problem. And politicians, unfortunately, they have to think by necessity in 4-year horizons, sometimes 2.5-year horizons, if you look at Ontario today, right? And what do we see, right? It depends on the politician. They're not all, the same, but, you'll often see them look for someone to blame. Often, they blame business. You hear ridiculous things about corporate greed being the real problem, as if, that was the reason for high prices alone, right? We see theatrics, like calling CEOs up in front of parliamentary committees to talk about, hey, you got to lower your prices. Never mind what your costs of input are or regulatory costs or anything else. It's just your prices that matter. You see policies to extract more money from people who've been successful, right? Like, the best example in the last year was the hike in the capital gains inclusion tax, which now fortunately looks likely not to survive, right? But I look at that, and it's funny because, you have governments, some politicians actually thinking, well, those who have been successful should pay a little more. And intuitively, there's maybe some appeal to that argument, but the problem is we're sacrificing the future by making innovation and entrepreneurship and investment in Ontario and Canada more difficult. We see short-term gimmicks, like tax holidays and rebate checks from both Ottawa and Queen's Park. And, it's kind of like the junk food of public policy, right? You feel a little better afterwards, but you're not really any healthier. If anything, you're probably less healthy because these gimmicks do nothing to build the long-term productive capacity of our economy. And we see nations, like our southern neighbor, retreating into protectionist madness, right? We're threatened with tariffs right now that would be disastrous for both economies, right? I've talked to the CEOs of all 8 state chambers. We actually have 8 states that border Ontario. I don't think I'd ever counted, before, right? And they're pretty politically powerful states, right? I'm talking about places like, Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, right? Which decide presidential elections. Every single one of those CEOs that I've talked to, I got them all on a group conference call to talk about trade before the US election. We briefed them and had experts come in and brief them. And they all said, we appreciate the briefing, but, we're there, we're with you, right? These tariffs, or the potential tariffs, that back then the election hadn't even happened yet. But if trade barriers go up between the countries, that hurts our businesses, it hurts our workers, it hurts our communities. Because trade wars have no winners, whatever Mr. Trump may think. They only have losers. And then we have the most existential problem of all. The climate is changing. And with every passing year, the risk of disaster grows. Floods, droughts, wildfires, and more. But with affordability as a pressing concern right now, if you ask the public, and we ask businesses across Ontario, what's your most important priority? Of course, they're not going to say climate first. They're going to say, I can't afford, to make ends meet. I've got to decide, what staff I can keep and what staff I'm not going to keep, right? Families have to defer expenses for the future. It's not surprising. It's not people's fault. But the problem is, if it's not a high public priority, politicians tend to ignore it, right? They either ignore it, or you see magical thinking, like technology is going to save us, or, Canada doesn't need to be part of the solution. We're only 2% of global emissions. Well, okay, yes, that's true, but 2% makes us among the top 10 emitters in the world, right? There are almost 200 countries in the world. So how can we not be part of the solution, right? Particularly when it affects our future and the future of our children and our children's children. I hope I'm not bringing you down. Am I bringing you down? A little bit. Yeah, usually we got honesty in this room, right? Northern Ontario honesty, right? I don't want to bring you down, especially after such a tasty lunch. But, and the other thing I don't want to do is I don't want to disparage or criticize politicians, right? Well, maybe one politician, maybe the guy in Washington, D.C. So can you believe that this guy is seriously arguing that a trade deficit is a subsidy? Right? A trade deficit, he says, is a subsidy. It's sort of like if I go into Tim Hortons and I order too many donuts, and then I come out of the Tim Hortons and I give a press conference and I say, Tim Hortons is treating us very, very badly. We are not going to subsidize the donut shop any longer. Sleepy Tim Horton, Nobody knows more about donuts than me, right? But yet that's what we get right now, right? That's what we get. And so my purpose, though, isn't to be critical. It's not to sound alarm bells. Quite the contrary. It's actually to show you why and how we have the opportunity of a lifetime, I genuinely believe this, in our grasp, as long as we play our cards right. And that's because the solution to all of these interconnected problems is to unleash the energy of our entrepreneurs, the productive capacity of our economy, the quality of our communities, and the capability of our people. And the beautiful thing, and why I wanted to be here, is because Northern Ontario can power so many of these things. So if I think about it, right, Ontario has made or attracted these historic investments in manufacturing, in Southern Ontario. Well, Northern Ontario is key to making that investment pay off for all of us for the long term. Essential to the growth of our economy. Essential to the urgent imperative of reconciliation with Indigenous people, nations, and communities. To the marketing of Ontario as a place for bright talent and affluent tourists. And to our economic partnership with the United States. And so I think of critical minerals, I think of timber, I think of energy, I think of the bioeconomy, right? This region can be a gateway to global markets through trade in these critical minerals that are essential for clean energy technologies and electric vehicles. Forests can anchor our bioeconomy and the people who live here, right, and that we want to attract here are resilient and skilled and resourceful and drive innovation across industries. But here's the thing, and we all know this, right? With great opportunity comes great responsibility, right? We can't just wait for the politicians to figure it out on their own. Part of the challenge, of course, is just political clout, right? Fewer people, fewer constituencies, lower priority, right? And so what do we do to change that balance of power, that balance of influence? Because our collective ability to solve the big problems that I described earlier will depend on unlocking this potential. And Northern Ontario's future, I think, is so intricately tied to the future of our entire province and our entire economy. So my pitch to you today is that there are 5 things that we have to do. So the first is, I already alluded to it, right? It's unlocking the potential of critical minerals. Nickel, cobalt, lithium, all these things can make Ontario a leader in the global energy transition that is inevitable, whatever happens. And that's why at the Ontario Chamber, we've just convened a new mining council, right? So we've got, right now, this is our 6th council, so we have 6 areas of policy priority right now. We've got energy, we've got infrastructure, we have health, we have workforce development, artificial intelligence, and we've just added mining. And I'm really excited about that one because working with the industry and working with partners like the Thunder Bay Chamber and the other northern chambers, we're going to be advocating for policies that enable sustainable development of these resources. And now I'm not a mining expert, right? But I'm learning. And I do see, though, that there are things I can understand. I can understand basic economics, and I can understand basic arithmetic, right? So I think about tax credits and R&D and infrastructure and so on. Well, Ontario's provided $52 billion in growth and incentives in downstream manufacturing, right, in Southern Ontario, including the EV supply chain. And that's really exciting. But yet, $52 billion in the downstream, but only $4 billion in the upstream, right, in actually developing the mining industry, right? And so unless that figure goes up, these shiny new manufacturing plants will be sourcing many of their materials from China, which doesn't do us any good, right? And the numbers also tell me that our labor supply is aging. Ontario is attractive to immigrants, but too few immigrants want to go into mining as their chosen career, right? That's something the research tells us. And the problem is, so for example, the mining engineering programs, at places like Laurentian or Queen's or U of T, they're not even filling their spots. And so when labor demand, as we all know, exceeds supply, we need to make those jobs more attractive. That's a challenge that we face together. So what do we need to do? We need major investments in infrastructure, from broadband to transportation, so that we can actually get goods, materials, and people, to the places where manufacturing happens. We need to invest in training. We need to invest in healthcare and housing and education so that people want to bring their families here or start families here, right? We need to not just spend money, I gotta say though. It's not just about spending money. We actually have to speed up and de-risk projects. And so that's about cutting red tape, it's about improving permitting, and it's about more than extraction. One thing that I've learned, in the past year is that, which you already know, I'm sure, it's also about creating value-added industries, like processing and manufacturing right here in the north, right? But the exciting thing is that while we've been talking about a lot of these things for many, many years, there's a sense right now that people are listening, right? Because mining is finally, for Ontario, a high-level priority. It's something the most senior people are talking about in business and in government. And the world 2025 that I've already, examined in the first part of my talk today, I think presents us with a really compelling opportunity that we've never had before. So that's exciting. Second imperative is international trade. Building our resilience in a world that's increasingly fractured and threatened by protectionism. So the threat of tariffs and trade restrictions can have severe consequences for Northern Ontario and for all of Ontario, right? And that's why just yesterday, the Ontario Chamber, we launched a new Ontario Business and Trade Leadership Coalition, where we brought together leaders from all of the industries that are either most affected by shifts in export patterns, or can help unlock strategic advantages for Ontario. And so obviously the Ontario Mining Association is among them, as are many others. So we need to strengthen our competitiveness and government policy creation during this time of risk and this time of change. Now last night, there were some people here, we were chatting, they said, what do you think is going to happen with Trump on February 1st? The latest deadline for the tariffs. Oh my God, if my guess is as good as yours, right? I don't know. And I don't even know if he knows just yet, right? Or his staff know, right? But we'll see what comes. And I guess what I'm going to say to you is that I think we have three imperatives, three things we need to think about. We have to show our strength as a province and a country and the willingness to use it, because we have the resources that America needs, regardless of the bluster, right? They need our oil, they need our minerals, they need our cars, like so many things that we build here, they can't replicate easily, right? In fact, they never may be able to replicate. America can't fill its manufacturing jobs right now. They don't have the healthcare, they don't have the quality of education that we have here, right? And that is a real barrier, right? And so that's why it's devastation on both sides of the border. But let's be clear. It's kind of like, now, and I think I've talked a lot to the Premier about this and the other party leaders and the federal minister, and I think right now he's striking the right balance in my view, because it's sort of like the open hand is here saying, look, we want to work with you, let's be partners, because the real competitor is overseas, it's not here in North America, but you also need the fist here, right? Because if the tariffs happen and we don't retaliate, well, there's going to be no end to the bullying, right? Because he would be reneging on a trade agreement that he literally signed, that he negotiated and signed and said it was the best deal in history. All right? So now, what would you do if your business partner of yours just decided one day, I don't like this deal. I'm going to rip it up and start a new one. What would any of us say? So when our government, if it comes to that, we have to support our governments, but our governments also have to support us. They have to support business, and I think they will. Second, we have to address our vulnerabilities, and that's both at the individual level and individual businesses. We have to look at, okay, how do we get smarter? How do we navigate? How do we, think about our pricing strategy and our export marketing and all the other things that we need to do to reduce the risk to our own businesses and our own workers, right? And as a country, right, the line I've been using is that if it's going to get tough, Canada has to get buff, right? It's that simple, right? It means getting major projects built. It means ensuring our tax and regulatory systems are competitive. It means supporting our small businesses to help them make investments in productivity and in diversifying their own export markets. It means dismantling interprovincial trade barriers. And, that's something that, we've been working hard on. And it's kind of exciting. Well, it's a bit alarming. It's taken us this major crisis to really get attention and focus on it, right? Because the problem is, this has been going on for years. But, we've got this external threat and we're saying, hey, America, free trade is the greatest thing. It benefits everyone. But yet we got to look in the mirror. We're not even allowing free trade within our own country. And so the number of the incredible range of regulations and crazy restrictions on trade between provinces and territories, that is dragging us down. And if we could fix that, and I think finally there's some momentum and some political will and business will to do that, if we could fix that, that is going to be worth more to our economy than the impact of all the Trump tariffs, even if they're 25%. Right? So let's get behind that. It's not sexy. It's not glamorous. It's not going to come up much in the election campaign, I don't think, but it's something we have to keep top of mind. And we can't let individual industries who might be afraid of a little change and a little more competition to drag us down. We have to be strong on this one, and we have to support that effort. And third, success in trade, I think, means, as I said earlier, it means presenting our American partners with a better alternative. It's that open hand, right? Because after all, when we talk about Fortress and Canada, right, it means that it makes more sense for America to do business with us than to do business with China. If you look at the great challenges and struggles and competition in the world. Okay, third imperative, addressing labor market challenges. We talked a bit about that already, because economic growth depends on people. And it's exciting to see, the Minister Hayu talked about this yesterday, Thunder Bay's inclusion in the Ontario Immigration Nominee Regional Pilot and the Federal Rural Community Immigration Pilot, right? Because that's going to help bring skilled workers to industries that are facing acute shortages. And we've pushed for this, as has Charlotte and her team, and it's great to see it happen. But we've got to go further. We've got to go much further. And that's why we were going to continue to advocate for policies that address systemic barriers to market participation. So that means investments in housing and transportation and training that are tailored to Northern Ontario's unique needs. It also means advocating, as we do, if you look at our election platform, which we launched this morning, we're advocating for major investments in Ontario's post-secondary institutions. Because if you think, again, you're business people, most of you here, right? And so think about it, right? In 2018, these institutions had a tuition cut of 10%, right? And that's 2018. We're now at 2025. It's been almost 7 years. So imagine if your revenue, one of your biggest sources of revenue, there's tuition and there's operating grants, right? So imagine if you have one of your biggest sources of revenue cut in 2018 and frozen for 7 years. Think about what inflation's been in the last 7 years and ask ourselves, why are we surprised when institutions like Laurentian, go through, severe financial problems? And they were kind of the canary in the coal mine, right? Because a lot of other institutions are facing that crisis right now. And so we can't accept leaders right now talking about multi-billion-dollar, support to support our standard of living today, while at the same time neglecting what's essential to our competitiveness and our future tomorrow. And that's our education system, right? You can't subsidize the present while you neglect the future. So let's aspire, I believe, to make Ontario's post-secondary institutions the best funded in the nation, not the worst. Our students deserve that, our communities deserve that, our future deserves that. My fourth imperative of 5 is infrastructure. And obviously, we talked about this a little bit already. Northern Ontario requires strategic investments, transportation, broadband, energy system to support industry and to support competitiveness in communities. And so projects like the Ring of Fire are obviously critical, but so are investments at the local level in infrastructure that connect remote communities to the markets, right? And that's why the Ontario Chamber and our network of 150 chambers and boards of trade across Ontario, and specifically the ones here in this region, we're committed to keep the pressure on Queen's Park and Ottawa. My fifth and final imperative today is something that we've already talked about a lot on this stage this morning, and that's partnership with Indigenous people, nations, and communities. Obviously, we have to have this partnership in order to unlock the prosperity that we know lies here in Northern Ontario, right? And I'm proud that through our Chamber's partnership with the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business, we're working after a long consultative process. We're going to be releasing this year a series of 5 reports on this topic, right? People, finance and capital, procurement, land and resources, and infrastructure and communities, right? So 5 reports. And we hope and we intend for these not just to be reports that gather dust on a real or a virtual shelf, right? Because the idea is, one thing we heard in our Ontario Economic Report last year is that businesses in general in Ontario, they want to support reconciliation. The heart is in the right place, but they don't know where to start and they don't know what to do. And some of them think, oh, I'm too small to be part of this, right? And so we have to give them a little bit of guidance, right? And I really appreciated some of the comments that we heard today, right? And I noted down some of them, this morning, right? So Jason Thompson, we haven't met, I don't think, before, but I loved your comment when you said, if you're not going to live it, don't publish it, right? And I think it was Jamie from Evolution Mining. I don't know where's Jamie here, but Jamie said, was talking about companies pulling back from commitments, right? To Indigenous reconciliation, for instance, right? Because they think, oh, this is no longer, we're not getting the same pressure we used to. Trump's in the White House, and other things are higher priorities for business and government right now. It seems to be, the pressure is not what it was just a couple of years ago. Well, here's what I'd say to them. If you did it because it was right, it's still right. If you did it because it was smart, it's still smart. And the smart money, I believe, isn't going to fold, it's going to double down. And I think we need to double down. And the other thing I think is that the Indigenous perspective can also help show us another way by teaching us and reminding us to look 7 generations into the future, into what our descendants, those people I started talking about today, would want us to do right here, right now. So speaking about that future, in less than 4 weeks, Ontario is going to the polls. Just over 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 1 day, I think. And elections are about choices. And in this election, one choice is clear. Ontario's competitiveness has to come first. And that's something the parties have to talk about. That's something the parties have to embrace. And yes, our governments have to address the threat of tariffs and trade disruptions. But my most sincere hope is that they and we can turn this moment into something more, embracing a long-term sustainable growth agenda that strengthens Ontario's resilience for the long term, and doing so in a way that ensures that the agenda is good for all communities, all people, and all regions. And if you look at our platform today, we're talking about investing in a skilled and inclusive workforce. We're talking about infrastructure, right? Growth-enabling infrastructure that we need to build. We're talking about a more competitive business and trade environment. And we're talking about investing in healthy communities, healthy and sustainable communities. Those are really the 4 pillars to our future. And so the only way that we're going to protect our standard of living and ensure a bright future for our children and our children's children is to address those things. So these times, they're going to test us. They'll test our resolve and our relationships. They'll test our courage and our convictions. We know that. But the great news, and that's why I'm here, is because Northern Ontario has the resources and the talent and the determination to lead. But we need to work together and we need to act together. So to close, I just want to say that there's never been a more essential time for us to stand together. There's never been a more essential time for you to be involved in the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce, or if you're from other parts of Northern Ontario, your local Chamber of Commerce, wherever you are. And I say this for 3 reasons. First, businesses need to support one another and learn from one another at all times, but especially in hard times. And together, what Chambers of Commerce do, and their members acting together, is providing advice and advocacy and networking and business opportunity and so much more. That is job one. It's supporting business in general and small business and Indigenous business in particular. Second, when we stand together, we are a movement that for politicians is incredibly wise to heed and incredibly hard to ignore, because we represent together at the Ontario level 150 chambers and 60,000 businesses. So that's businesses of all sizes, of all economic sectors, and in every community in the province. That is why we get listened to. We don't always get heeded, but we always get listened to. But we have to unlock those doors, and we have to be strong, and we have to stand together. And finally, it's about leadership. And I look at admiration at the partnerships that I see here, and having local economic development leaders here and leaders from different industries, Indigenous leaders and the Anishinaabe Business and Professional Association and the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce, right? That leadership is so essential, because it's not just about thinking about what business needs today. It's about thinking about what businesses and workers and communities need tomorrow, right? And that is how we have impact together. And that's what's special about chambers, because chambers of commerce are for those who are business leaders now or aspire to be business leaders in the future. And if you're involved, that is each and all of you. So, to close, it's easy to look at the world around us and feel anxiety, but you can feel 2 things at once. You can feel some anxiety, but you can also feel some optimism, which I do. And it's easy to see uncertainty, but kind of like a miner exploring the earth beneath us, we have an extraordinary opportunity if we look closely enough, and we do. When everything is uncertain, anything becomes possible. And so I say together, let's make prosperity possible. Thanks for listening.
Q&A, right?
Q&A, sure.
And there goes Harold.
My old friend Harold.
Hello, Dan.
Hi, Harold.
Really appreciate your 5 things. Okay, thought you covered them off well. It was excellent. But one thing you said at the beginning that I'm interested in, putting you on the spot, is, as you said, you've been talking to your counterparts at 8 other chambers for the states that surround the Great Lakes. And one of the challenges I know that's out there, and maybe it's just a timing thing, but they've been silent, as well as some of their major members of those chambers, as the president in the United States has made his comments. Is that a strategy, or is there some encouragement to get them to get out there and say something to back up what you're saying?
Yeah. Harold, that's a great question. And I think the challenge they face right now, and this is a broader challenge, and you see it with some of the biggest companies in America, right? You see it, with various companies climbing down on their diversity and inclusion commitments. You see it in, some big tech companies, wanting to, curry favor with the administration because they think that this will actually, insulate them in some way in the future. And I think at the chamber level, they're just very, very leery to make public comments, about a threat that in their minds has not yet materialized. But they all, I've talked to all of them. I talked I talked 2 days ago to the head of the Wisconsin Chamber, who's the national vice chair of the National Association of State Chambers. On Friday, I'm talking to the guy who actually is the president of that association. He's from Washington State. And they're all on board. And I think behind closed doors, they're making the case, right? One of the state chamber leaders, I don't think I can say which one, because I don't know if it's public, but he was actually on the president's transition team. Now, I don't mean he's sitting there in the same room as Trump, because the transition team has hundreds of people on it, right? But one of the streams is around economic development. He said there's nobody in that room that was advising Trump's chief of staff directly, who thought tariffs on Canada were a good idea, or even tariffs on Mexico, right? But they believed that as a negotiating strategy to get Mexico to move on issues that are important to the US, that tariffs were a useful stick. But I think the problem is, my perception is there's a bit of a power struggle on this topic happening within the White House itself. And part of the problem for Canada and for our business leaders in the US is there's really no one they can talk to right now. This is the crazy thing about it, right? I mean, the Secretary of State has been now confirmed, but most of the other cabinet members are not even in place yet. So who is there to talk to? They're not legally able to talk to other countries until they actually have been confirmed in their jobs. And so, everything then has to happen at the staff level, and it's incredibly chaotic. So, I think, short answer, I think they are making this point behind closed doors, and I've certainly been encouraging them every single conversation I have to turn up the volume, because in the end, if there's a threat to their communities, and they need to speak out, right? So my sense is they'll wait to see what happens, and then they'll probably carefully start to make their voices heard. Great question. I think I've tired you all out. Well, look, thank you. I'll be around. I'm catching the late flight back home to Toronto, but I'll be around for the afternoon. And if any of you want to connect individually or on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with you, and anything I can do now or in the future to support this incredible community, I'd be delighted to do it. So thank you again, and have a great afternoon.